The fluorescent light in the conference room flickered, casting long, uneven shadows on the cluttered whiteboards that covered every wall. The kind of room that doesn't exactly scream innovation. More like desperation. 12 engineers, half of us surviving on Red Bull and pure spite, sat around a long, worn table, each of us hunched over laptops, scribbling lines of code that were worth millions in potential, but somehow, right then, felt like we were just barely holding it all together. Apex Nova wasn't a glamorous company. No fancy lobbies, no sleek glass buildings. Just a tight-knit group of people working in a tiny office, like underdogs fighting in the trenches of some far-off tech battlefield. And if there was one thing I knew, it was that we had more heart, more grit, and more raw talent than any of the execs upstairs could ever understand. We weren't just developers. We were warriors. My team and I had built something monumental. A modular AI platform that could plug into any industrial system, learn on the fly, and optimize processes in ways that made traditional supply chain solutions look like toys. The platform wasn't just a product. It was a statement. I wasn't the manager of this group. I didn't need a title. I was their general, the one who'd earned their trust through blood, sweat, and too many sleepless nights. I had proven myself just like everyone else in that room, by navigating the chaos and ensuring we made progress. But then everything changed. It was a Thursday, and Blaine had just walked into our little war room. I had never seen someone quite like him. He wore aviators indoors, which I immediately took as a sign of trouble. His first words were about our flagship AI product, calling it just some Python glue. I felt my blood pressure rise at the dismissal, but I didn't let it show. Couldn't. Blaine wasn't just a new hire. No, he was the embodiment of everything that had been wrong with Apex Nova for as long as I'd been there. MBA speak. Buzzwords. No real substance behind the sharp suits and slick smiles. He swaggered into our lab, and the first thing he did was take aim at our work. Our process. The very thing we had built from scratch. He pointed at our Kanban board, dismissing the entire thing with a single sneer. You guys still use sticky notes. Really? If there was ever a moment when I should have just walked away, that was it. But I didn't. I stayed. I tried to explain patiently what we had done, how we had made it work under impossible circumstances. I pulled up our system architecture, explained the pipeline, walked him through the integrations. But Blaine. His eyes glazed over after 3 slides. He didn't care. I'm a big picture guy, he said dismissively. Let my people handle the weeds. I felt my hands curl into fists. He was the kind of guy who thought leadership was just about looking important, about throwing around vague terms like synergy and streamlining without ever once rolling up his sleeves and getting into the dirt. But it wasn't until a couple of weeks later that I realized the full extent of Blaine's incompetence. That was the day everything changed. It wasn't just his poor decisions. It wasn't his disregard for our hard work. It wasn't even the moment he tried to cut me out of the project entirely. It was the way he dismissed everything we had done. The way he acted as if we had no value. As if the years of late nights, the sacrifices, and the blood, sweat, and tears we'd poured into this project meant nothing. He called me into his office, as he'd done so many times before. He leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded like he'd already won. Karen, he said, stretching my name out slowly. I've been thinking. You've done amazing work, truly. Everyone says so. I could feel the weight of the words pressing on me. The trap was being set, and I knew it. He was about to give me the corporate guillotine. But, he continued, we're moving into a new phase. A phase that requires a different kind of leadership. Less hands-on, more decentralized. We need to empower the team. You understand, right? I felt my throat tighten. This was it. He was about to cut me loose. You're planning to cut me, I said flatly. He chuckled. No one's getting cut. We're evolving. Roles shift. Needs change. I could feel the room spinning. I had given everything to this team, to this project. And now Blaine, who had barely even scratched the surface of understanding what we had built, was going to take it all from me. He wasn't just firing me. He was undermining everything we had worked for. But I didn't say anything. I just stood up, grabbed my things and walked out. I didn't scream. I didn't demand an explanation. I didn't even roll my eyes. I just walked away, and as I did, I felt the weight of it settle deep in my chest. I didn't know it at the time, but that moment would be the beginning of something much bigger. It wasn't just about losing my job. It was about the revenge that was already brewing, the quiet storm that was about to tear through the heart of Apex Nova. And Blaine. He had no idea what he'd just set in motion. Product. It was about every person who had trusted me to lead them through the impossible. It was time to make sure Blaine would regret underestimating us. And that was just it happened on a Monday. Course it did. Mondays had a way of taking whatever hope you had left and crushing it under the weight of bureaucracy and middle management. Blaine called the meeting, but I knew better than to trust anything that came from him. By now, he'd made his intentions clear. The firing wasn't about performance, it was about control. But this time the manipulation had gone too far. He was going to use my absence to restructure the team, to give himself the illusion of power. I showed up early as always, taking my usual place in the corner, out of sight but never out of mind. The rest of the team trickled in slowly, each one of them as bleary-eyed as I was. Still, we were all here, focused, determined to get this damn product out the door. I hadn't said anything to any of them about what had happened. I didn't need to. My absence from the room was already speaking volumes. They were in the dark, but not for long. Blaine, of course, had to make an entrance. He walked in like he was running the show, acting as though he was in control of every little thing. The difference now was that the team wasn't buying it. Not anymore. All right, team. He clapped his hands with forced enthusiasm. Big changes, new quarter, new direction. We're making some strategic adjustments to maximize throughput and minimize friction. I could see the confusion on their faces. They weren't sure what he was talking about. Neither was I. But then he dropped it. Effective immediately, Blaine continued, his voice dripping with corporate speak. Karen will be stepping away from the project. Team stays. Karen goes. Silence. It was deafening. The kind of silence that makes you question if anyone has heard you. The kind of silence that rings louder than any word could. I was standing there, watching as every single engineer's face shifted from shock to disbelief. They had no idea what Blaine was doing. What had just happened. He didn't even look at me as he spoke. He just casually dismissed me like I was some outdated piece of equipment. Like I was the system that needed to be upgraded, rather than the one who had made it all happen. I didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting. I didn't ask for an explanation, didn't even roll my eyes. I just stood up, grabbed my laptop and slid it into my bag. Thanks for the donuts, I said with a small nod toward the half-eaten tray on the table. Then I walked toward the door. But as I reached for the handle, I heard it. Wait, Logan said, his voice clear and strong. I turned around, not surprised. Logan was the first to speak, but he wasn't the only one. One by one they stood. Priya, Rachel, Dylan, nor Liam, Annika. They were all leaving. They weren't saying anything. They didn't need to. They didn't need speeches or grand declarations. They didn't need to justify why they were standing up for me. They were just moving. Like loyal soldiers, they followed my lead. I stood there in the doorway, feeling the weight of their loyalty settle in my chest. For a moment I couldn't speak. I just held the door open as they filed out behind me, one by one. There were no speeches, no dramatic gestures. Just a quiet, steady march out the door. Blaine stood there, sputtering in the room, too stunned to say anything more. He tried to fight it, to claim we were being insubordinate. He called it a walkout, but we didn't need to say anything to make it clear. They were choosing me. And in doing so, they were making it impossible for Blaine to ignore the fact that the team wasn't his anymore. I didn't say a word as we made our way out of the office and into the parking lot. I didn't even look at them as they filed out. They didn't need to hear anything from me. Their actions spoke louder than words ever could. Karen, you didn't have to do that, Logan said as we reached the parking lot. I looked at him, but I couldn't find the right words to respond. Yeah, we did, he said, answering his own question. You built this. He just inherited it, Rachel added. Let him find out the hard way who holds the keys. And Dylan, ever the cynic, just muttered, Screw that guy, before lighting up a cigarette. We didn't talk much as we all filed into our cars and left the office behind. They didn't know what I had planned. Not yet. They didn't know that I'd already taken steps to protect the product, to ensure that what we had built couldn't be taken from us so easily. But Blaine. He had no clue what was coming. And for the first time in months, I felt the weight of everything I'd built for Apex Nova shift onto my shoulders. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every engineer who had poured their soul into T-Beginning. It didn't take long for the news to spread. In corporate environments, word travels fast, and soon enough the whispers began. People in the office, some who had barely noticed me before, now seemed to look at me with curiosity. They didn't know exactly what had happened, but they knew something had shifted. Blaine, of course, was doing his best to spin the situation. I could imagine him pacing around the office, muttering about optimization and efficiency, trying to convince anyone who would listen that my departure wasn't a setback. It wasn't personal. It was just about the bigger picture. But I knew the truth. I wasn't just a casualty of corporate strategy. I was a threat to the fragile empire Blaine was trying to build, and he knew it. As the days went by, the company's tension began to mount. Blaine's attempts at running the show weren't going over as smoothly as he'd hoped. There was confusion, frustration, and, worst of all, the nagging feeling that they were about to lose control of the very thing they thought they had in the bag. The modular system I had built, what Blaine had thought was just some random assembly of code, was the company's backbone. Without it, they were nothing. It wasn't just about technology. It was about the integrity of the entire operation. And Blaine, in his arrogance, had torn the one thing keeping it all together. I didn't call anyone. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't need to. I already knew what was going on. The product was struggling. The engineers were being asked to pick up the pieces, but they couldn't. Not without me. And as time passed, it became more and more apparent that Blaine had no idea how to navigate the very system I had created. Then came the calls. I'd set everything in motion. I had made sure that my departure wouldn't just be an inconvenience. It would be a reckoning. The legal clause in the modular contract wasn't just a technicality. It was the rope around Blaine's neck, and I'd made sure to tie it tight. Redline Systems LLC. That was the key. When I had founded it, I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew I had to protect my work, my team, and the intellectual property that had made us indispensable. When the company had threatened to freeze our budget, I had acted quickly. I created a firewall, both legal and technical, so that no one could touch the core of what we had built without going through me first. And when Blaine fired me, he had unknowingly signed his own death sentence. The first sign of trouble came when I got an email from Priya, one of my most trusted engineers. Karen, heads up. Blaine's calling everyone in for a chat. Says he wants to rebuild Team Synergy. I think he's about to pull some bullshit. I felt my heart skip a beat. This wasn't just about the product anymore. Blaine was panicking. He didn't know what to do without us. I tapped out a quick response. Let me guess, he wants to know when you're free to jump back in. Priya's reply came almost instantly. Yep. He's offering to restore continuity with a leadership-neutral structure. Neutral face. Sounds like someone found the license notice. Smiled. It was time. They were about to find out exactly what I had set up. What Blaine hadn't read. What he had overlooked in his rush to cut me loose. I forwarded the message to my attorney, Alina. I didn't need to say much. Just a simple, bring the clause binder. Alina replied with a thumbs up and a PDF titled The Karen Clause. Final draft. It was time to watch Blaine squirm. Meanwhile, Blaine was busy. He was trying to get the team back under his control, trying to rebuild something that had already crumbled. But the truth was, he had no idea how to do that. The product wasn't just a piece of software. It was a living, breathing entity, and it had been nurtured by a team who knew it inside and out. It couldn't just be handed off to someone else. Not without consequences. And those consequences were about to come crashing down on him. The next few days were a blur of frantic messages from Blaine. He sent emails. He left voicemails. He even tried to loop in HR to offer clarification. The tone shifted from smug to polite, then desperate. He was starting to realize that he wasn't in control anymore. The product was falling apart. The systems that had been running smoothly were suddenly offline. Clients were starting to notice. And the worst part, Blaine had no idea how to fix it. The crisis reached a head when 3 enterprise clients reached out directly, asking the same question. Why was the test integration offline? What happened to the demo environment? Was there a breach? Blaine tried to pass the buck to DevOps. But DevOps couldn't even access the control panel. They were getting the same polite error message I had set in place. License authorization expired. Contact Redline Systems to renew access. By the time Blaine realized what had happened, it was already too late. His hands were shaking as he tried to troubleshoot, but the deeper he dug, the worse it got. He had ignored the contract. He had disregarded the licensing agreement. And now he was trapped in a web of his own making. Blaine stormed into Ellen's office, desperate, holding up his tablet like it was some kind of lifeline. "Do you know anything about a license termination notice?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Ellen didn't even look up. "It's Redline's system. You terminated the administrator." Blaine's face went pale. He had been so sure of himself, so certain that he could replace me, that he could step in and fix everything. But now he was realizing what everyone else had known all along. Without me, the system didn't work. And worse yet, he didn't have the keys to fix it. I didn't respond to any of Blaine's calls or emails. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than his panic. I had built something that was bigger than him, and now it was collapsing in front of his eyes. Meanwhile, I sat quietly at home, reviewing a new round of contractor interest from a client who actually understood modular AI systems. They were ready to sign. They knew the value of what I had created, and they were willing to pay for it. Blaine's empire was crumbling, but mine, it was just beginning. The emails from Blaine kept coming. But by now, his words had lost their sting. Every email, every phone call, every desperate attempt to get me to respond only made his position weaker. He was like a man trying to catch air with his hands, but the faster he grasped, the more it slipped through his fingers. I didn't read any of his messages immediately. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening, exactly how it was going to unfold. The system I had created, the one that Blaine thought he could control, was slipping through his grasp. And he had no clue how to make it right. I had everything in place. The legal protections, the backup plans, the clauses that Blaine had so casually ignored were now circling back to him like wolves. And he didn't even know how to fight back. Blaine was scrambling to keep his empire afloat, but his sense of control was a mirage. The systems were failing, and there was nothing he could do. No amount of frantic phone calls, emails, or PowerPoint presentations could fix the mess he had made. The worst part was that the higher-ups at Apex Nova were starting to notice. And they weren't happy. The board, in particular, was beginning to murmur. They had invested millions of dollars into a product that Blaine had, until now, taken full credit for. They didn't realize until it was too late that the backbone of their product, the very thing that kept it alive, had been created by someone else. Someone who had been unceremoniously kicked to the curb. I didn't need to attend any of the meetings. I didn't need to read the countless Slack threads or hear the board members gossiping about product continuity and client-facing environments. I had already made my move, and I had the law on my side. 6 months before Blaine even walked into the office, I had already created the firewall. The modular license, which he had signed off on, was the key. The system I built wasn't just a product, it was an asset. Valuable one. And now, Blaine's ignorance was costing him. By the time the board called an emergency session, I was already sitting in my living room, sipping a hot cup of tea and staring at my laptop. I had forwarded the necessary documents to my lawyer, Alina, and we were ready to play the next move. The email invite had come in the night before. It was a subject line that said it all: Red Line Access Pathways. I forwarded the email to Alina with a simple message: bring the clause binder. Alina had already been briefed. She knew the ins and outs of the contract. The minute Blaine had fired me, he'd triggered a cascade of legal consequences he didn't even realize were coming. But now it was time to take control. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I took my time reviewing the contract one last time before the meeting. I knew that Blaine's desperation was palpable, and it would only make his downfall more satisfying. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for justice, the kind that comes from being prepared, from understanding the system better than the people who thought they controlled it. The day of the board meeting arrived, and I showed up exactly 12 minutes early. I dressed like it was a high-stakes merger, sharp, professional, but not overdone. The only thing that mattered was making sure that I was seen as the calm, collected force that was going to bring everything back into alignment. Blaine, of course, was already there, slumped in a chair like he had spent the night pacing. His tie was crooked. His eyes were bloodshot. The arrogance that had once filled him was gone, replaced by the uncertainty of someone who had underestimated the system he was supposed to be managing. He didn't say a word when I entered. He just blinked at me like he had seen a ghost. I didn't acknowledge him. I didn't need to. The board was already here, half of them dialing in from various locations. Ellen from operations was there, calm and composed as ever. Marissa, the legal expert, gave me a nod of approval. The rest, they were waiting. The chairman cleared his throat, smoothing his cufflinks, and glanced at me. Karen, we'd like to find a path forward that benefits all parties. Translation: we're in a mess and we need you to fix it. I didn't wait for him to finish. I opened my folder, and Alina clicked her pen. It was time to make my terms clear. 1, I said without preamble. Immediate reinstatement as license administrator. Non-revocable for the duration of the current platform lifecycle. The chairman nodded, taking notes. 2, I continued. Full administrative oversight of any system touching Red Line modules. Blaine shifted in his chair, but I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. He was already defeated. 3, I said, keeping my voice steady. Compensation package adjusted to reflect market disruption impact. Triple the previous base salary. Backdated to termination date. I saw a few board members exchange glances. They weren't expecting this. But they also weren't in a position to argue. 4, I added. Public correction of my departure to clarify contractor oversight status, not performance-based removal. That was important. Blaine had tried to spin my firing as a performance issue. It wasn't. It was his inability to understand the value of what we had built. And now I was going to make sure the world knew it. 5, I said, leaning forward. Blaine is not in any meeting, room, thread, or policy affecting technical operations ever again. That one stung. I could feel Blaine's eyes on me, but I didn't break my gaze. I wasn't here for his feelings. I was here to take control of what was rightfully mine. I closed the folder. The room was silent. Blaine opened his mouth, but the chairman raised his hand. You're excused, the chairman said, his voice cold.